Good afternoon, members. Welcome to this BCP Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting. For anybody that's joining us online, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you for showing the interest to join with us today. Before we start the meeting, I would like to invite our Democratic Services Officer, Jill Hollyoak, to give us some housekeeping information. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. Please note this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chairman. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the ground floor of the multi-storey car park. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. So agenda item 1, apologies. Do you have any apologies, please, Jill?
Apologies have been received from Councillor Sean Gabriel and also from Chief Executive Graham Parent.
Thank you. I understand we have Councillor Derek Borthwick substituted for Councillor Gabriel. Hello, Derek. Good afternoon. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interests on any items on the agenda? No? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4, confirmation of minutes and action sheet. The board are asked to approve the minutes of the meetings held on the 5th of January. Incidentally, there is no action sheet. There are actually nothing that we need to discuss, so there isn't an action sheet today. Can I seek your agreement for the minutes that have been published? All agreed? Yes, thank you. Thank you. Jill, are there any public issues?
There are no public issues to report, Chairman.
Thank you, Jill. Which brings us to an important item, agenda item 6, BCP surface water runoff and sewerage overflows. And we're very fortunate to have with us today Ruth Barden from Wessex Water, who is the Director of Environmental Solutions, and Ian Withers from the Environmental Agency, who's the Area Manager for Wessex. We also have a number of officers in attendance in the background waiting in case we need some additional information from them. That's Peter Haken, who's the Head of Regulatory Services, Chris Saunders, who's the Service Director, Destination Culture, and although he's not here at the moment, Councillor Mark Anderson, who is a portfolio holder for Place and Environment, he'll be arriving a bit later on.
Steve has just arrived.
He's here. Yes, larger than life too. Hello, Mark. Good afternoon to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Stephen.
Yeah.
I blame the Mayor.
Okay, thank you. This agenda item was brought to the board at the request of one of our members, which was Councillor Rigby, if I recall, and agreed, because there's been a lot in the press about this particular item of late, and we thought it'd be a good idea if we could invite Wessex Water and Environmental Agency to give us a bit of an update so we can improve our understanding, not just our understanding, but all the public's understanding of some of the issues involved. I think we asked a couple of quite basic questions of Wessex Water, and the first one was what is the current situation regarding water pollution? Where does it come from? How serious is it? And what are the effects arising from it? And secondly, what is being done to reduce pollution and how long will this take? And that's a couple of questions that I put to Wessex Water. And for the Environmental Agency specifically, we asked what the role of the Environment Agency as the regulator, who is responsible and for what are the standards required, what are the standards achieved, and the expectations for the future. So those are some pretty basic questions that we've asked. And our guests have very kindly agreed to give us a presentation which will cover those questions. And initially, I'll be asking Ruth if she would give her presentation, followed by Ian's presentation. And I'd like both of those to be presented, and then we'll follow up with a question and answer session after that. Okay, so we can allow the presentations to go sort of through uninterrupted, and then we'll come back and ask questions later. So that's enough from me. Good afternoon, Ruth. Would you like to introduce yourself and then give us your presentation? Thank you.
Very much. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm Ruth Barden. I'm Director of Environmental Solutions at Wessex Water. So I sit within our Engineering and Sustainable Delivery Directorate, which delivers our environmental enhancement programme. Within my area, I've got responsibility for our environmental investigations team, our catchment delivery team, our environment planning team, and also our catchment partnerships team. So very outward focused.
Ruth,
also,
sorry to interrupt you, Ruth, but we're having some trouble, I think, hearing you clearly. I'm just going to ask members if they can hear clearly enough.
I was just about to say I couldn't hear very well. Either the speaker's wrong or Ruth needs to speak more slowly.
Yeah, I don't know what microphone you're using, Ruth, or whether you're near enough the microphone or what. I'm not quite sure what it is, but could you just, could we try again? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Hopefully, can you hear me better now?
Oh, that's much better. Much better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, so I'm Ruth Barden. I'm Director of Environmental Solutions at Wessex Water within our Engineering and Sustainable Delivery team. So it's a very outward-facing team. I'm responsible for our environmental investigations, our catchment delivery team, environment and planning team, and also our catchment partnerships. And we collect a lot of environmental data, which then supports future investment. So a lot of that is around water quality. So what I'll do now is I'll share my slides, which I have prepared. If you just bear with me for a minute. So can you see those?
Yes, I can see them, Ruth. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Right. So hopefully that's on slideshow. Right. So, and I've got my email address there as well. So if you want to contact me with any subsequent questions, then that's fine. So obviously this is just sort of reiterating the information which you provided me. So obviously the area of interest and also the two specific questions. So if I move on to answer those individually, I did provide a more detailed presentation as well with some background information which you may find useful in sort of partly to support answering these questions, but also to provide a little bit more context. So the first question for Wessex was, what is the current situation regarding water pollution and where does it come from? How serious is it and what are the effects arising from it? Well, this isn't really a question for Wessex Water, unfortunately. This is a question for the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency is the regulator for air, land and water, and it's their responsibility for classifying water quality and regulating against pollution, so not Wessex Water. And I'm sure Ian will go into that in a little bit more detail. What I have got actually in a couple of slides is just showing what Wessex Water's responsibilities are, just for sort of purpose of clarity, really, to help explain perhaps why we can't answer this question. So, I mean, sources of pollution, well, what is meant by pollution obviously can originate from point source, so from pipes, or diffuse from overland flow, and runoff, can be urban or rural, can be acute, at a moment in time, or chronic over a long period of time. And not all discharges are pollution. All of our discharges are permitted and compliant with those permits and often have no adverse environmental impact. So just because something is operating doesn't mean it's causing a pollution and doesn't mean it's illegal either. There's been a reasonable amount of sort of misrepresentation around that in the media recently. So Wessex Water's responsibilities, we're responsible for the provision and maintenance of the public sewerage system, for treating effluent to permitted levels through our sewage treatment works or water recycling centres before returning those to the environment. And we have a overriding responsibility for protecting and enhancing the environment. And as you can see, we take that very seriously in terms of our company purpose. We're a regulated business, so both economic the drinking division is regulated drinking water inspectorate, but that's more for public health and ensure that awesome. This regulation informs our investment decisions, both in terms of the amount of money which is available for us to invest in infrastructure improvement and capital maintenance, and also in terms of how much we can charge customers for our bills, and also our profits and returns to shareholders as well. And we recognise that because water quality and flooding is a sort of a multifaceted area, we try to work in partnership to enable efficient delivery and deliver common aims and outcomes. So work very closely with local councils, with our regulators, and also local interest groups as well. So the assets which we operate are water recycling centres, also known as, these are designed to treat sewage from villages, conurbations, and discharge those back to the environment following treatment to a standard which is permitted by the Environment Agency, and that's both a flow standard, so the amount of flow which we receive and have to treat before returning to the environment, but also the quality standard, so the quality of that effluent. And that discharge is typically regulated by European legislation, so the polluting potential of that discharge, nutrients, and also bacteria. And the effluent which we receive includes sewage, rainwater, and trade wastes as well. So most of the sewerage network within the BCP area will be combined. So it takes both foul sewage and also rainwater and runoff. Flows, which are obviously a key focus for the media at the moment, and these act as a pressure relief valve to prevent properties from flooding during times of heavy rainfall. As I mentioned, our sewerage system typically is combined, so it's taking foul water and rainwater as well, but obviously pipes only have a finite capacity, and during heavy rainfall events those pipes can be inundated, so storm overflows are permitted to be able to discharge storm points in the environment where there is believed to be less of an environmental impact, given that the watercourse they're discharging to is also in spate due to the heavy rainfall. And these are permitted in terms of the frequency that they discharge, but also the flow rate before which they can discharge as well. So they predominantly carry rainwater. In certain locations, they may also carry groundwater as well, and also include sewage and trade discharges as well. But the idea is that they're dilute and don't have a harmful impact on the environment. There's a lot of information here which is on storm overflows, both information provided by Wessex Water, but also that which is more readily available in the public domain, either through Environment Agency website, DEFRA website, or third-party NGOs. So on the left-hand side is sort of the hyperlinks to that information, and on the right-hand side is a bit of a description on it. So that's entirely up to you to sort of peruse at your leisure. Some of it obviously is available on request from Wessex Water. If you've got a particular location where you're concerned about them, please do get in touch with us and ask for more information. We're very, very happy to provide that. There's also information on our drainage and wastewater management plans, which includes a spreadsheet which provides details of overflow frequency from many of our storm overflows as well. So you can have a look at that and look at the annual data for operation, both in terms of numbers of times they operate, but also the duration as well. So that's some context in terms of answering the first question, and sort of almost the reason why I can't answer the question, because Wessex Water isn't responsible for river water quality. The second question which you asked me is what is being done to reduce pollution and how long will this take? Again, I can only answer from a Wessex Water perspective in terms of improvements to our assets and our permitting discharges in terms of wider pollution and the wider regulatory powers which the Environment Agency has and plans to address pollution. Obviously, Ian is in a better position to answer that than me. So the first point to note is that water company investment cycles are 5-yearly. We call them periodic reviews, and they're submitted to Ofwat at certain timescales. So the next one being we'll submit it to Ofwat in October 2023. Ofwat will consider that, and then they will give us their final determination in December 2024 for that business to start from the 1st of April 2025. And that will include details of all of the investment which we are required to undertake to comply typically with European environmental legislation, but also anything which is enacted within the Environment Act prior to that date. Also all of our capital maintenance and also the kind of ongoing business costs associated with a water company. That will be considered our investment plan for the next 5 years until 31st of March 2030. So we've really just started sort of considering our next business planning process. The first stages of that are very much for our regulators, Ofwat, Environment Agency, and also DEFRA, to provide their thoughts on what their expectations are for the next business planning period, what they would like us to consider, what capital improvement works, and also the sort of standards that they are looking to achieve as well. So we're working through that at the moment and identifying the requirements which will be submitted within our business plan for consideration by Ofwat. So sort of talking about pollution and water quality requirements, as I mentioned previously, all of our assets are permitted, and those permits enshrine sort of European, or up until now, European legislation in terms of the requirements which those discharges need to achieve. So typically under the Water Framework Directive, focusing on nutrient, nitrogen and phosphorus discharges, also possibly chemicals and frequency of flows. We've also got the shellfish areas, which is very much looking on bacterial loads. So that's E. coli and intestinal enterococci, similarly for the bathing water regulations as well. So typically this is our permits relate to quality standards around those elements, the amount of flow which we have to treat, and frequency of discharges through either provision of sort of storage tanks and things like that. So on the right hand side here, this is what that sort of means in terms of what we do. It's treatment which we install is either for phosphorus or nitrogen removal, UV disinfection to reduce the bacterial load, storage tanks to reduce spill frequency. So very much civil engineering to address those needs. So I've got some examples here of some recent investment, and also I think with the presentation I did include some fact sheets. So for Poole Harbour and the Stour catchment, obviously not all of those catchments are within your operational area, but an idea of what we're undertaking. And whilst sort of the upper Stour might not be within your direct area of concern, obviously improvement works which we're doing in the upper catchment then manifest themselves on improvements down in Christchurch Harbour and Poole Harbour, for example. So here are some examples of what we've been doing. As you can see, the AMP stands for Asset Management Plan. So this is the 5-year investment plan, and the number represents the number of that plan since privatisation. So the 5th Asset Management Plan ran from 2010 to 2015. One of the key schemes there was to eliminate the Holton Heath sewage treatment works to transfer the flows to Wareham and provide UV disinfection at that location, just as an example. So here are some of the other sort of investment plans which we've been or improvement works which we've undertaken, and you can see levels of sort of nitrogen or phosphorus removal which we've achieved since then, and also levels of investment on storm overflows. We've also identified where we've been undertaking some investigations. We're very mindful that water bills pay for this improvement works, and we want to ensure that any improvement works is based on sound science and evidence. We don't want our customers to be sort of wasting their money on something which isn't going to deliver a substantive environmental change. So here are some, I'll just click through these. here are some examples of some of the storm overflows within our area, or particularly within the area that you're concerned about, and the current sort of and future options for improvement. This is all included within our drainage and wastewater management plan, which sets out a comprehensive investment plan for the next 25 years. These are due to be consulted on in June this year, and we have been working with all local authorities and lead local flood authorities, as well as our regulators, to develop these, to identify what are the issues which we need to tackle, the particular assets, future developments and demands on the drainage infrastructure, and then the investment which is required for that. So you can see there are some sites where we have been providing improvements at the moment, often increasing pumping station capacity, or being able to pump more flow through the network to the treatment work, rather than reducing the number of discharges there. Obviously, this is a very complicated issue. There's a lot of rainwater which is also being pumped forward to sewage treatment works for treatment, which really isn't an ideal situation. And so we are working particularly with local authorities to look to see where there are opportunities to remove the surface water, the rainwater, from the sewerage system as well, and if that can be dealt with locally on site. And certainly for future development, we wouldn't expect to see any rainwater coming into the combined sewerage system. So when I talk about sort of addressing storm overflows, this is what we mean. Basically, the DEFRA Storm Overflow Task Force commissioned their consultant Stantec to understand what would be the costs of eliminating storm overflows in England, and the price range was between 300 and 600 billion pounds, which could be an increase to water bills of up to £1,000 per year, and that £1,000 would go into digging very big holes in the ground to store storm water, or potentially to separate out the rainwater from the foul sewer, to reduce the amount of volume within the current sewerage system, or potentially to provide treatment either on the top there, as that's UV disinfection, essentially killing the bacteria in the combined effluent, or potentially, where possible, looking at nature-based solutions, so looking at wetland treatment to again similarly sort of kill the bacteria using natural UV. Some of the work which we're doing, working very closely with some of your colleagues, is to look at opportunities, instead of eliminating overflows, be able to provide warning to particular industries of when an overflow may happen, so that they can perhaps adapt some of the work which they're doing to reduce the impact of those overflows. And it's fair to say that in terms of shellfish, storm overflows do have a part to play, but they're not the only cause. So this would be a sort of an information step, but there may well be other causes which are happening in the catchment aside from our storm overflows, which can cause a deterioration in water quality, which may affect the industry as well. So this is something which we're working closely with the shell fisheries industry, the Environment Agency, CFAS, and also your colleagues at BCP to deliver this during the course of this year, to enable some active storm harvesting of shell fisheries, to reduce having to recall product retrospectively as bacterial levels have been determined through sampling. I mentioned our drainage and wastewater management plans. So these are currently in production, and will provide water companies, all water companies are doing these, a comprehensive investment plan looking forward for the next 25 years. Obviously, we can't completely foresee what might happen in 25 years' time, but it's understanding what are going to be the demands on our system from climate change, from growth, urban creep, things like this, which cause sort of impact the capacity of our system, and require us to either invest in new infrastructure, or to further kind of maintain and improve the current infrastructure which we have. Also very mindful of carbon. A lot of the solutions which I mentioned require a lot of concrete, a lot of disruption as well, and obviously pumping water around has a high operational carbon input as well. So these are things which we're looking to reduce where possible, but then balance sort of expectations and service provision in terms of flooding and water quality. So as I mentioned, these will be consulted on or out for consultation. I've been working very closely with colleagues to develop these as well. There are clearly synergies between our infrastructure and the infrastructure which the council owns and operates as well. So where there's the opportunity to work together on these to deliver the maximum benefit for the lowest cost to society, we're clearly looking for that as well. And what we're very keen to do is to seek changes of legislation as well. We don't believe that surface water should be in the file system, and it should be returned to the environment as close to where it lands as possible, so that you're not depriving areas of that water, which can have impacts for abstractions and things like that as well. So what we're looking for is changes in legislation to reduce the volume of water, which is surface water, which is being added. So in terms of looking at developments, no water connecting into surface water system, into combined system, and that if that is the case, we should be able to remove that surface water and dispose of it locally to a nearby river or stream. There are issues with groundwater ingress into the sewerage system, typically from private pipes from the individual property to the main sewer, which are maybe not maintained as well as they should. So we're looking for opportunities to either be able to line private pipework, treat these combined storm overflows, particularly through reed beds and things like that, because they are predominantly groundwater, sort of sewer capacity, so that isn't compromised into the future. This is not reflected in current legislation, so we are seeking change to that. So these are some of the things that we'd like to see. We want to remove the developer's ability to right to connect to the nearest drainage pipe, improve the regulation around urban creep, so having potentially building control measures on paving over front gardens and things like that. Make it easier, obviously, as I mentioned, to disconnect rainwater from combined sewers and be able to discharge that to local watercourse, and basically better building control where there's kind of within an urban environment, which then adds problems for us. What we have found is that the average sort of semi-detached house during a 60-minute rainstorm, the average kind of rainstorm that you'd expect a year, has the same volume of rainwater as 128 properties. So if you've got a new development of 500 homes, all of them are connected to the combined system that has a similar population equivalent of about 65,000 homes in a 1-hour rainfall event, which is not surprising then that systems become inundated. So here are sort of the key messages here, which you can read yourselves, but I'd like to draw your attention to the feedback from the Environmental Audit Committee, which says the responsibility for improving water qualities in rivers cannot be laid solely at the door of the water industry. The project to restore all rivers in England to good health will require the engagement and collaboration of a wide range of stakeholders. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm very happy to take questions at the end, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Ian, would you like to give your presentation? Thank you.
Certainly. If you bear with me, I will share some content. I remember how to do that. Bear with me. That should be visible. I don't actually know how to turn it into a screen show, but can you see that, or do I need to do something else?
Yes, I can see it. Thank you.
You can live with that. Okay, good. Thank you, and very, very grateful for the invitation to speak this afternoon and help your understanding. The benefit of going second is that Ruth's had the lion's share of explaining how a lot of this works and has done a great job. So I've only got, I think, 4 or 5 slides, which will add to hopefully what you've heard, and then allow us to have a conversation. So I think the first thing to say, I'll just do a quick sound check, Chair. You hearing me okay?
Absolutely fine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. First thing to say is the Environment Agency is one of several, or if not many, regulators of Wessex Water and the water industry, and a lot of what Ruth's described I regulate through my work and my teams, and much of it we also work collaboratively with Wessex Water on as well. So we sort of have a regulatory remit, but also, as Ruth described, particularly in her very last point, actually this is very much a collaboration. And sometimes that does make life a little bit difficult in terms of our relationship, but we try, and I think we succeed, Ruth, don't we, to have a role as a partner and a regulator almost simultaneously. And the good news, I suppose, for all of us is that, and Ruth would have been too modest to say it, Wessex Water are one of the industry leading companies and have been for several years, at least 4 or 5 years, because each water company has an annual assessment of its performance across a whole range of environmental indices, and Wessex Water is, I'm pleased to say, one of the better companies who takes its obligations very seriously. So that makes life easier for me as a regulator of their activity to get the environmental improvements that Ruth described. So on the screen there, there's just a quick overview of what my role as a regulator of the company does, what it covers. So I'm responsible for Somerset, Dorset and Wiltshire, essentially, and a little bit extra here and there, but essentially those areas and all the catchments that sit within them. And that, in the case of the BCP area, as everywhere else, means that we have a role to police pollution incidents, and Ruth mentioned those are the discharges that are undesirable, unwanted, and often happen by accident in this case, and we respond to those and understand why, and if necessary, if it's serious enough, potentially take enforcement action, sometimes legally, to hold the company to account. We also undertake a lot of work that doesn't particularly involve the water industry. So, for example, my team regulates what farmers do and how they interact with the environment and influence water quality through their activities, both surface water, coastal water and groundwater, which is of course often forgotten. You can't really talk about pollution of watercourses without talking about sufficiency of water. So a huge amount of our regulatory effort is around regulating the water resources, as we call it, that is available to society and the environment. So we regulate by making sure that people don't take too much water out of the system, which of course not only removes it for others, but means that dilution of what's discharged into watercourses doesn't work as effectively. So water quality, and water resources have to go hand in hand. So that's an overview, and we're concentrating today obviously on the water industry. There are companies like Bristol Water who only provide clean water, potable water. In this case, in Wessex Water's case, they do that and also deal, as Ruth has said, with wastewater treatment. So our role as a regulator is around making sure that the permits that Wessex Water hold to undertake that treatment and discharge the effluent into watercourses is within the limits that we set, which are designed to protect the water quality that receives the effluent. And then sort of moving slightly on from the regulatory role, the last two sub bullet points there, environmental services, as I call it, and Ruth and I are involved in quite a lot of this work, which isn't regulated as such. It's more of the partnership stuff. So it's about, for example, in Poole Harbour, working with the agricultural community and landowners to improve the environment at a landscape scale across multi-catchments. So look, that might be about reducing nutrient inputs, for example, to our rivers. And then, as Ruth has described, we also have a role with Ofwat and others in assessing and signing off and having an influence on the plans that Ruth has talked about earlier, so that the investment plans that the company has. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I mentioned earlier Wessex Water's environmental performance is annually reported, and that is publicly available information through, I'm sure, on Wessex Water's website, but also on the www.wessex.gov.uk website. Wessex Water, as I said, is a 4-star company. That's the highest rating, and that means that they are industry leading, which is good. And you'll all be aware, so the last point there is just acknowledging that, you know, the debate you're having, with the discussion we're having today, and the debate you'll no doubt have as a result, is very topical. And we've all seen recent headlines in the BBC, The Guardian, and elsewhere on the performance of the industry as a whole. And there have been several publication, I should say, of data that have, you know, focused the public's attention on the way that we all rely on water and our environment, and that, as Ruth also said, there's a lot of misinformation and sensationalization, I suppose, sensationalism, I should say, about some of that data. And you know, clearly, as a regulator of the water industry, we have a role in making sure that the water industry is held to account. But it's a much bigger problem, and it comes down ultimately to how much the customer, the public, is prepared to pay for the environment that it wants. Okay. Little bit of detail on our monitoring role, because of course, as a regulator of the activity that Wessex Water undertakes, we need to undertake monitoring to understand its impact. And in terms of bathing water quality, we have 19 bathing waters in the BCP area that we monitor seasonally for bacterial concentrations that are an indicator of fecal contamination. And rather than talk about what those results are here, you can look at the output of that monitoring online very easily. Published annually, well, published weekly actually during the season, but is available to you for a long time as well. We also undertake chemical and biological monitoring of watercourses elsewhere, so not just on the coast, for Water Framework Directive surveillance. There are a number of sites around Poole Harbour and sites that we monitor for nutrient concentrations and phytoplankton, which is of particular interest in that catchment. We don't do any specific monitoring for shellfish water protection, but we work with partners, CFAS and yourselves, as Ruth mentioned, on specific cases, and we are involved in the assessment of bacteriological quality in shellfish water protected areas using other people's data. So there's quite a big monitoring remit, although I have to say that has declined in recent years for a number of reasons, but there are more players in the monitoring market now, and actually the use of third-party data is becoming much more prevalent. Apologies, there's a lot of words on these slides. I won't go through each one, but obviously the slides will remain with you, and you can see them at your leisure. Ruth's covered a lot of it, but these are hopefully reassuring you that we, as the regulator, are very much part of the conversation with Ofwat and with Wessex Water itself about what is needed in the long-term planning process to address the problems that we're seeing or that we can foresee coming up. And what's important point to remember is that through these asset management plans, quite often during one AMP period, we would encourage, we don't need to encourage them a great deal if I'm honest, but we would encourage the water company to undertake investigations of problems with a view to then, in the following AMP period, invest or spend on putting resolutions in place. So it's important because this is a long-term planning process, although it's broken down into 5-year periods. It means that we can take a long view. Improvements are going to be needed, which I think is really important in improving environmental planning. So that's a key point. I'll leave that slide with you to look at it at leisure. This I think probably just gives a little bit more information about the same subject. So again, I won't go through those in detail, but you're very welcome to digest them and drop me a line if you need more information. What I thought would be interesting is if I just dwell a little on investment and improvements, as Ruth did actually, on BCP specific geography. So considerable investment over the last few AMP cycles, actually driven by shellfish issues and standards. So the application of UV disinfection has been a really important development. So particularly in Poole Harbour and locally, that's a big issue. As Ruth mentioned, a reduction in the frequency of spills, and this is what some of the media reports have been focusing on just recently, as you'll know. This is a big area. Wessex Water absolutely appear to understand their obligations and are spending a lot of money through their investment programme to address this, which is good. Storm storage capacity, as Ruth talked about, absolutely vital component of the future as population growth carries on, and what people expect from their environment also exceeds its ability to cope. And some of this is important because we need to understand how often these spills occur and for the duration that they cause potential harm. So we've been working with Wessex to install what's known as event duration monitoring, which is simply technology that tells us what is happening at the outfalls that it's not possible to watch all the time. So that's an important piece of the evidence that will help us develop and improve our local environment. And then the last point really is about I suppose the modelling that is therefore possible as a result of some of this scrutiny and monitoring and the direct impact on improving water quality, particularly around Poole Harbour, but not exclusively Poole Harbour, and making the case for continued investment by Wessex Water. Chair, I will stop there and happy to take questions and participate in the conversation to follow.
Yes, thank you very much, Ian. Okay, members, I think we'll open this up for debate now, and I think I'll invite Councillor Rigby to start off. It was Councillor Rigby that brought us to the board, so is there anything you'd like to raise?
Thanks very much, Chair. Firstly, thanks for both of you for your presentations. It's really useful to get an insight on what we're actually looking at, and it has probably given me more questions than anything, to be honest with you. One thing I want to draw attention to start with, and I've got a few clarifications if you can as well, but the one thing is both of you mentioned about this sensationalisation in the media, and I don't think that's correct at all. These are becoming more and more reported stories, yes, and it's because it's important. I mean, if we look at the Surface Against Sewage Water Quality Report for 2021, Wessex Water were third in the percentage of health reports submitted within your boundary based on the bathing water locations. The top 20, number 17, which was the first Wessex Water site, is Christchurch Avon Beach, which wasn't even mentioned within the presentation, along with the other outlets along Boscombe, Bournemouth and the whole seafront, which you also have these combined overflow outlets in. And I know we were focusing on Poole Harbour a bit as well, but I think it's really important to draw attention to the bathing water as well and the quality there. And it is on the ground reports from our residents who are using the sea throughout the whole year, not just within the bathing season as well. When the Environment Agency, you're doing your testing, I believe, between May and September. We've got cold water swimmers, we've got surfers, things like that. So these tests which are being done, yes, within the bathing season, but it's also outside, which is really important as well. A couple of questions as well, if you can. I don't know who'd be better placed to answer it. When you consider the storm events which feed into the combined outlets, and obviously, as I understand it now, overload the combined systems, which results in the sewage being put into the seas and into the watercourses. What do you consider to be a storm event? What is it designed for? Is it a 1 in 1 year storm? Is it a 1 in 5 year return? Is it a 1 in 10, etc.? So how often is it that, I mean, we've got the reports on how often these are turned on, but what's the actual design for how these are coming in? And obviously with the impacts of climate change, this is going to become more and more pressing, as in SUD's design at the moment, so sustainable urban drainage, we're already designing for a 40% increase due to climate change on what the maps are showing. So it'd be interesting to hear your views on that. And finally, and to leave space for other people, because I know we are short on time on this as well, is you've both mentioned about the government and the regulations and what you're doing. Everything is within the regulations, and I understand that. And I think from what you've said, you almost understand that these regulations are limiting. So what are you actually doing to lobby the government? I've read Wessex Water, you've been doing bits about the advertising behind what's flushable and what isn't, potentially on like some products. But what else besides that are you actually doing to lobby on legislative change, which would help you achieve the changes which you're trying to show you want to get here? And I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
A few questions in there. I think probably Ruth to start off with, is it? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely happy to start off. Yes, completely understand your point about monitoring outside the bathing season. And at Avon Beach, Boscombe and Bournemouth Pier, we are working with the local community there to be able to take some samples outside the bathing seasons. We started just before Christmas. We've got a couple of volunteers, including the Sorted Surf Shop, and also a member of our staff as well, who's going down and taking samples every fortnight, but also trying to get some responsive samples, so following rainfall events as well, where possible. Obviously, there are some health and safety issues which we need to consider there. So we are understanding that. We're also working with BCP, work with particularly the surf shop to illness information to better understand whether there is a cause. It's probably fair to say that all of the bathing waters along the Dorset coast are either excellent or good in terms of the bathing water classification as well. And the only way you will not get ill from consuming water is if you consume tap water. If you go swimming with your mouth open, it's not free of bacteria. So that is just something, to be aware of there. In terms of the questions which you specifically asked, what is our sewage infrastructure designed for? Simple answer, but it's not. It depends on the kind of overriding legislation. So if we're if are within or thought to be in an area which may impact a shell fishery designated shell, then the overflows are limited or permitted to not discharge more than times over the year. So that's over the calendar year and over an average of 10 years as well. So it may be that some years are very wet and some years are quite dry, but that averages out to that frequency. And then bathing waters as well, there's a different requirement there as well. Actually, I think I've got that the wrong way around. Sorry, I think it's 10 times for bathing waters and 3 times for shell fishery waters. Obviously, the bathing waters, it's in the bathing season, which is May to September, and shell fisheries is year round. So that's something which these are modelled designs based on both sort of rainfall level, also some modelling for climate change, which also looks at kind of permeable areas within particularly conurbations as well, input impacts that you might get from that. Otherwise, our sewerage network increasingly being designed to be able to counter for a 1 in 50 rainfall event, but as part of the drainage and wastewater management plans, we're looking to have sort of higher, to be up to 1 in 100 year return periods, particularly at sensitive locations. So it's a bit, it depends on your specific location as to what might be the requirements there as well. And then one of your other questions, what are we doing in terms of lobbying? Well, one of my colleagues, Matt Wheeldon, who's our Director of Assets and Compliance, is TIF on DEFRA's Storm Overflow Task Force, and he's leading the regulatory and legislation group there. So when some of the points which I finished my presentation with in so we're lobbying the combined system, we're lobbying for the right to disconnect rainfall and then to discharge it at an appropriate watercourse, and also lobbying for increased levels of building controls on extensions and paving and increased hard standing essentially on domestic properties as well. As you rightly say, we do a lot of work with sewer misuse, so things like wet wipes. We did the water industry did bring a campaign to the advertising standards that wet wipes shouldn't be considered flushable, and it went up to the High Court to understand what flushable meant, and you can physically for it's flushable irrespective of the problems it then causes. So we do a lot of work around that. Also, fats, oils and greases have done a huge amount of work, particularly in Swanage with local communities on that. We do have some blockage hotspots where we then work with local communities to improve sort of behaviour there as well. Time being, so I'll hand over to Ian to see if he's got anything else to add.
Yeah, Ruth, you've, I think, covered. I'd add on the last point is that we don't lobby the government ourselves, since we're essentially an arm's length body of the government. But what we do is use our data, hopefully in a compelling way, to support where the government might have an interest in making a certain improvement. So we would support, for example, in Ruth's scenario there in Swanage, some of our data on pollution incidents or cause of sewer overflows or rising main bursts. Our data would be backing up the case made in this case by Wessex. So that's probably how we best add to that conversation, I think. I think the other points Ruth's covered in detail already, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Devman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to pick up on the subject of the testing, which I think it's Ruth mentioned that they have got some volunteers doing extra testing, because the testing, I can only really speak for Avon Beach, which in fact it's called Gundamore, but there we go. We had water testing for the 5 months, as Councillor Wrigley mentioned, I think, but we had such trouble over there that we involved our MP, and he has lobbied, so we are lobbying, even if you're not. And we are trying to get the round the year testing, and I know that our own BCP councillors, portfolio holders, I think, have been involved. So yes, I think that's going to be a success if we can do it. I think it's obvious that testing just for the bathing season is not enough. And the other thing I just wanted to take up, which is I think I mentioned further, well, right at the beginning of the presentation from Ruth, was you mentioned consumers having to pay goodness knows how much if you are starting to dig holes to do all these jobs that you need to do. And I just wanted to bring in the fact that the dividends payable from these water companies are absolutely massive. And if it's to be believed, the article I read and various others, it's 90% of their profit is paid out in dividends. Now, every company that I've ever been a shareholder of, if you're not doing very well and you've got to do jobs, your dividend goes down. And I cannot see the link between making the customer pay but still having these huge dividends. And it isn't a question that needs answering today, because I think it's one that's a bit more overall about possibly bringing these companies back into nationalisation. So thank you, Chair. I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure you'd like to answer that one, Ruth or Ian. I think it was more of a comment, and probably one we should be asking the Minister rather than you. So I think we'll move on. Councillor Stribley, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll echo some of the comments made by previous speakers, as I've made a few notes here. I know it's not illegal for discharges, but basically I think it's totally and wholly unacceptable 9 times out of 10. The fact that you can do it 10 times a year doesn't mean you should do it 10 times a year. We are told when we are giving planning permissions for new developments that, oh yes, no problem from the water companies, they can deal with it, they can sort out, supply the water and deal with the drainage, etc., etc. Seems to me, it appears from the presentation, they're more minded as to increasing their profits rather than actually making sure that the water quality doesn't deteriorate. You only have to drive around any part of the conurbation to see numerous solid blocked driveways. If this is something that the water companies have power over, then perhaps they should do something. If it's something the council has power over, perhaps the water companies should advise the council where to do, and the council could do that, because porous driveways do accept a great deal of water and prevent it going down into the public sewers and drains. So do we limit development until the water companies can deal with the sewage and runoff, or do we actually go on getting more and more discharges into our waters? Poole Harbour is a particular concern of mine, but also is the beach from the harbour entrance right the way across. And actually, I haven't been down there since Boxing Day, but I did go down for a walk yesterday. And in the 200 or 300 yards from Shore Road to halfway to Flaghead Chine, because that's as far as I went, there were 5 groups of cold water swimmers. So to say the swim period is from May to September is a nonsense. I don't go in all the year round, but I used to. When I first came to Poole, I used to go in, well, most every day, but certainly every single week, right throughout the year. And you'd be surprised how many people do. And particularly there's been a recent television programme on the health benefits of cold water swimming. So you will see more and more groups of people doing it. And they weren't all wrapped up in rubber suits, I can tell you. They had ordinary swimsuits on and were coming out very pink with the cold, but thoroughly enjoying themselves whilst doing it. So we need testing all the year round. And if the water companies can't deal with it, then they need to say so, and we'll have to reduce our level of planning permissions and developments. Because in North Poole, we've recently given permission for about 700 new homes. Now all that's going to flow down into one of our waterways and into off our shores or into the harbour. So it needs attention. And if money is to be spent, and the companies, and again, part of the presentation which most concerned me was the comment, well, we have to see how much we can charge and how much profits we can get to return to the shareholders. Well, I accept they're private companies, they need to make profits. But if they need to make investments, and I don't always agree with Councillor Dedman by a long shot, but on this one, you need the investment because the future profits will be greater and hold for a long time. To go on hobbling along as is happening at the moment, I think is quite unacceptable. People move to this area because they love the harbours, the waters, the beaches. We have hundreds of thousands of visitors come down in the summer, people from London, Midlands, etc., and even further afield. And yet if we're going to say, well, the water's reasonably okay, but it's a bit on the dodgy side, so keep your mouth shut. I've never heard anything like that before, and I'm really concerned with what I've heard this afternoon, Chairman.
Thank you. I'll just invite Ruth and Ian to comment on the remarks that you've made, but maybe whilst you're doing that, you'd like to just comment on the issue about SUDs and building regulations as they currently are, because, you know, the key to a lot of this, and we talked about actually, you know, what's happening, but not what's necessarily causing it as much, which we know is the amount of rain that's discharged into the foul sewers. And that's what causes water companies to have to make these periodic discharges. And that's the crux of the matter. So development, as I understand it, having been a member of the planning board for quite some time, SUDS legislation requires you to drain surface water into a separate system, primarily through soakaways. And it's only in exceptional circumstances that where, for example, you have a flooding condition in the area, we are actually allowed to put the discharge into the foul sewers. And in those cases, you then have to make additional provision for pumping stations or attenuation tanks or whatever in order to accommodate that. But I was interested, you know, about, you know, what is specifically the legislation around that as it stands at the moment, because I think Ruth was suggesting that, you know, there was work going to encourage more sustainable type of drainage. But my understanding that the legislation is already there, making provision for it. So I wonder if we could just clear up on that issue. Ruth?
Yeah, sure. So there is legislation to encourage sustainable drainage, absolutely, and planning policy does suggest. I will say I'm not a planner, but planning policy does suggest that any surface water generated within a development should be disposed of within that development in a sustainable way in sewer system. However, if that is not possible, then the developer has the right to connect into the combined sewer, and we do find that frequently does happen, despite the best endeavours of local authorities to prevent that. It should be noted that water companies are not statutory consultees on planning applications either, unlike our regulators. So whilst we do liaise and also developers, we undertake sort of capability assessments, capacity assessments of our sewerage network to can accommodate the flows which may be generated from that development, both foul flows and, if asked, surface water flows, or strongly advise that we will not accept those. The developer or the planning authority doesn't have to accept what our findings are. So that is something which does happen, and we try to have sort of very positive relationships with local planning officers to encourage that. But we can't sort of put in a refusal to a planning application in the same way that our regulators can.
Ian?
Yes, I was just going to make the comment, and it goes back to what your previous speaker was saying. Really, I think the way that you're absolutely right about, you know, sampling out of season, getting a better understanding around the data year round, and so on, and absolutely recognise the point that swimming isn't just for the tourists in the summer. And I will take the point away. I'm not responsible for the monitoring side of our business, and but I will speak to my colleague Jim Flory about how we, as an organisation, might be adapting our approach to recognise the fact that, you know, people use the water on the coast and elsewhere all year round now. I was going to make the point really that, you know, we both ourselves, Wessex Water, and the rest of the industry need to be very conscious of the way that the needs of society from its environment are changing, and think about how we best respond to that. And of course, there's a likely cost to that, and that's something that society will have to think about. But for example, you know, there's much more interest in inland bathing waters now, and you know, and why not? You know, it's a lovely thing to do. But at the moment, the way that inland water quality is regulated and paid for and protected does not yet protect bathers from the risks of bacterial concentrations in inland waters. And so if we were, we've got to try and look ahead, haven't we? And as a regulator, as an industry, think about how we can move towards the environment that we want, that we are all prepared to pay for. And it's a bigger conversation than the one we're having today, I accept. So I will, Chair, take that question away about the Environment Agency's obligations on, or aspirations, I should say, in terms of winter sampling of bathing waters on the coast, at least. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. I have to sort of start by just saying how disappointing it is to hear the regulator talk about the public sensationalism and the Water Board telling us if we go around with our mouths open, we should expect to get infected. I'm mortified to hear that in a public meeting, and I think really that shouldn't be acceptable. We live in the 21st century. It's not sensationalism to expect your water to be clean, and you shouldn't, goodness sake, you shouldn't go around with your mouth open. I've never heard anything so really awful. I'm really concerned. I've been to numerous meetings and seminars that tell us that 10 overflows is deemed acceptable. I'm actually looking at the Wessex Water's own website. It's the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan interactive map. And what's so shocking about it is, with a few exceptions, and those exceptions do seem to be Bournemouth Pier and Boscombe, almost all of them have got huge increases. If I look at sites in Poole Town, you're looking at 25 spills in 2017, up to 44 in 2020. One that looks like it's around Beta, 1 in 2017, 30 in 2020. I look at even one in Broadstone, which didn't have any previously, has now got 7. You then look at surface groundwater in Litchett, it goes from nothing to 64. Christchurch goes from 3 to 43 over the same period, with almost all of the sites, even the ones where there's only 2 or 3, they're places that they weren't being shown previously to that. And I just worry that what should be exceptional circumstances is now deemed as ordinary, and that can't be right. I accept that that's what the legislation allows, but it feels as though it's a dive to the bottom. Well, we can do 10 at every place without anyone blinking, so we'll do 10. And if it goes beyond that, then perhaps we'll apologise. That's not good enough. I completely accept and agree with my colleagues saying that we shouldn't be accepting water companies paying huge dividends while the public are fishing sewage out of their houses, which I've seen in my own ward. I've seen evidence of it. So my questions really are, firstly, even though Wessex Water are not a statutory consultee, should they be putting some effort behind proactively responding to planning developments so that permeable surfacing is used, on-site sewerage is being done, SUDs are there, even when they're not a statutory consultee? That feels like something that if a responsible organisation would go out of their way to do. Secondly, should you and we be lobbying that developments over a certain size should automatically have on-site sewage treatment works? Is that something that you would recommend? And thirdly, what should this council be asking government for? We have 5 MPs that cover this area. They are all members of the government's own party. So, frankly, they should be being listened to. Some of them appear to be on the telly more often than, the Simpsons right now. But, they presumably have some clout. I know that the portfolio holder is listening. I would like to think that this board will make a recommendation to the portfolio holder to write to the government and lobby. What would you like that to say?
Ian, is this one for you to start with, maybe?
Well, yeah, I'm very happy to start, Chair, and thank you for the comments. Just to, for the record, what I was, I think, careful to say was that the media were responsible for sensationalising much of the publicity around discharges to the environment, not the public. I absolutely would agree that the public have every right to scrutinise us as a regulator and the company, I'm sure. What was unfortunately reported in the media wasn't quite accurate, and that was probably it was what I was referring to, perhaps with a lack of clarity. So I apologise, but that's certainly the intention that I was trying to give. I agree with a lot of what you say, and our role as a regulator is to make sure that Wessex Water do their very best, not to meet the target of 10 or 3 or whatever it is, depending on the regime, but they do everything in their powers through the investment they make and the way that they run their business to have actually zero where possible. And that is, believe me, that is a shared aspiration. And I have weekly conversations with colleagues of Ruth about the number of pollution incidents that the company are responsible for, and I am absolutely certain and assured that the aspiration of Wessex Water is to have zero. In reality, that's an extremely ambitious and difficult target to meet. It's nevertheless one that they aspire to, and one that we encourage them to aspire to. So the shared interest here, although we regulate the company, is to get to zero and to get to no environmental harm, or certainly negligible, and that's what we both work very hard to deliver. The realities, as you've heard, are the growing population and the behaviour of companies who are sometimes unscrupulous as well, who Wessex Waters is bound to receive their effluent sometimes, and that causes problems. So it is a complicated arena that all holistically needs to be regulated very strongly. Yes, so I think so the other points you make, I think, probably are best covered by Ruth.
Yes, thank you, Ruth.
Okay, so I guess, I mean, one point that you probably should be aware of is obviously that if bathing waters are classified as excellent, that doesn't mean there's a zero risk of getting ill. I think that was the point which I was trying to make. There are a number of influences on bacterial levels within bathing waters, from birds, all sorts of other activities as well, dog fouling on beaches. All of this can contribute such that there is a presence of bacteria in bathing water. It's not all from storm overflows. The only source of water which is absolutely free from bacteria is drinking water. So that's what I was referring to there. But to go through your individual points, so yes, Wessex Water isn't a statutory consultee on planning applications, but we do proactively respond and engage with local authorities to understand what planning projections are within their area. We respond to local plan consultations. We do engage individually with developers themselves, as well as local residents groups as well. We've got a group within our company, which is called our Developer Services Group, and they do spend pretty much all of their time liaising with external parties around development, which is either planned or projected within our area, to understand what our capacity is, both in terms of provision of water for drinking water, but also ability to provide sewerage functions as well. So that's an ongoing conversation which we do have, and we will have with many of your colleagues as well. In terms of lobbying for developments over a certain size to have on-site sewage treatment works, I think probably the issue to consider there is that whilst developers may be very happy to provide an on-site sewage treatment works, they may well not be quite so happy to manage and maintain that in perpetuity for the life of the development. There is quite a lot of sort of legislation and guidance around developer provision of sewerage and sewage treatment assets, around sewers for adoption guidance. It's something which is quite well known both for developers as well. Wessex Water's preference is not to have on-site sewage treatment works because they tend to not be built, well, constructed or operated to the standards which we require. They're again, we're not responsible for the negotiation of the permits for those, and then we're left with a legacy which can be quite difficult to deliver, and obviously then that the costs for that are passed amongst the entire customer base, which, taking on board your comments about profits, which actually are regulated by Ofwat, it's Ofwat who says how much we can make in terms of profit and the dividends there. Then in terms of what should the council be asking government for via your MPs, I think you should be asking government to recognise that surface water and rainwater has no place in sewers, and that should we as a society want to address this issue, then there are two things which we should do. We should understand what is the environmental and public health impact of these overflows which are operating. Just because they're operating doesn't mean they're causing harm. We don't know that. There's insufficient monitoring to be able to understand that at the moment, and that's something which we're working very closely on in terms of our investigations, and also some of the work we're doing with BCP to get a better understanding of which are the overflows which are causing a deterioration in water quality, either in terms of bacteria or actually the kind of nutrient loading from them. So getting a better understanding of that, and then prioritising those which are shown to be causing harm, and understanding what that solution should be. Many of the solutions which I mentioned are around civil engineering, so again need to consider, in terms of climate and ecological emergency, is it the right solution to be digging up roads, installing very, very large concrete storage tanks under car parks and things like that to attenuate flows? Or are there other solutions which we can be looking at more widely in the catchment, more nature-based solutions, footprint, as well as either cleaning, improving the water quality of these discharges, or mitigating them? So that I think there are some quite challenging societal considerations which we need to factor in to this discussion as well, and that's something which again should be made, the local MPs should be made aware of, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Slade wants to just briefly come back in. After that, I'll take questions from, and then I know that Pete Miles, Councillor Pete Miles, has been waiting very patiently online to speak, and so after Councillor Slade, we'll ask Councillor Miles to come in. Thank you, Councillor Slade.
I will be brief. I'm going to have to play that back because I'm afraid there was so much and I didn't actually really get an awful lot, apart from there is no place for surface water in our sewers, as to what we should ask for. And I would have liked to think there's a bit more to it than that, because if they don't go in our sewers and you don't want them elsewhere, I'm not sure where it's going to go. But I just want to clarify something you just said. Your preference is not for on-site sewerage, and that you would prefer that it does use your services. And I understand about the business of not wanting to, that companies don't want to carry on with that maintenance. I have serious concerns then if you take places that are upstream where building is happening. So, for example, in most of our towns, most of our building is being planned, or the large-scale building is being planned on the green belt, which is upstream, which is going to come down to our existing housing, which has small sewers from 50 to 100 years ago. Those houses, if you continue to connect them upstream, it's the houses downstream, like a whole load of houses in Fontmell Road last year that were flooded with sewerage because the sewage system isn't sufficient. So you're not, surely then, if you're going to build 600 houses, for example, in Merley or in Holdenhurst or Rochot Hill, then the houses downstream need to have their sewerage systems updated to take account of the 600 homes going upstream, if you're not going to put the sewerage on site. Have I got that completely wrong?
Sorry, Ruth?
So there are some differences here. So sewage on-site sewage treatment works we are not keen to adopt. In terms of sewerage, then the sewerage should be designed for the population or development which it should serve. It doesn't necessarily mean that an upstream development will connect into the downstream pipes. It may well be, depending on the capacity of the network, that separate infrastructure is required to connect to a different place in the network which has the capacity for those additional flows. And when I mentioned previously that our developers team undertake sewerage capacity assessments, that's exactly what they're looking for. At what point in the network is it appropriate to connect that additional develop or the flows from the additional development to, and the developer themselves has to pay for that infrastructure. There are infrastructure charges laid out in the Water Industry Act which provide the provision for that. So that's the way which it happens.
Thank you very much. Councillor Miles, please. Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Al. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I'm not, well, I may be incorrect, but I thought I heard Bruce say that we have to have 10 years of record before there's enough evidence to determine whether action needs to be taken. You know, given we're in the kind of early throes of changes due to climate change, you know, the evidence is only just beginning to come through, but we're experiencing very significant issues. You know, are we really, is that really the case that we literally have to wait 10 years, by which time the water companies will probably say they haven't got enough money to deal with it because they've distributed it all through dividends? And we agree absolutely with actually Councillor Stribley and various other people. But of course, it's Councillor Stribley's party that is largely causing this problem. What we have is a situation.
Councillor Howes, can you please
not
politicise this debate on?
People need. It's not politicising.
Yes,
people need to understand.
If you could just keep.
People need to understand that the government, you know, direct off whatever regulatory agencies are, etc., to keep prices low for the customer, on the basis that while prices are low, people don't understand wider issues, and you know, essentially the water companies and other utilities can just run down the assets and infrastructure until they fall over, and now they're falling over as a consequence of that action. And meanwhile, the friends of government have pocketed all this money, which is public money. You know, we have a situation here where these are monopolies. The water companies are not behaving in the way they do because they're trying to outcompete a competitor. They're behaving in this way because they set up a regime which allows them to exploit customers. Therefore, the water company has a choice as to what degree of exploitation it wishes to engage in. And what is happening is that they're maximising.
Excuse me, Councillor Howe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I do agree with Councillor Stribley. You are giving us a lecture, and let's remind ourselves that the sewer system's 100 years old. There's been several types of governments in that, and it was only in 1960 that the need to split the rainwater from the sewers was implemented, and there's been several different types of governments since then. Can we please not politicise this debate and just stick to some? And remember that our guests, their area representation, you know, looking after the system and the Environment Agency in this area. And that's what we're talking about, what's happening here, not on a national governmental perspective. So can you please stick to the area issues? Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, after your request, I did refer to government. I'd like to make it clear that this applies equally to the current government and indeed the previous Labour government. They adopted similar approaches in this respect. But goes back to my point.
Can we just please stick to this
Yeah,
Thank you.
Well, I'd just like to correct that point because that people might not understand this. You know, I was once a member of the Conservative Party, and it is by being a member of the Conservative Party I realised what an exploitative organisation it is. So, thank you.
Councillor House, I asked you to stop. You refused to. That's showing a lack of respect for the chair. I'm going to give you one warning here. If this is repeated, then I'll adjourn the meeting and ask you to leave. Thank you.
Okay, so if I may continue with the point I was making.
No, you can. What you can do is ask the questions of our guests. So not a long rambling political statement. Can we just ask the questions?
Yeah. So on my first question was the question about the 10 years.
Thank you. Monitoring officer wishes to come in. Thank you.
Give me, Councillor Howell. I just wanted to mention that when the chair stands, it's incumbent on all members of the committee to remain silent and not speak. Thank you.
Thank you, monitoring officer.
I'm so sorry, but I couldn't hear what you said.
Let me just repeat that. Monitoring officer said that when the chairman stands, everybody should stop speaking. That didn't actually happen when I stood. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Howes. Would you like to carry on?
Yeah, of course, Councillor Stribley was in breach, but she hasn't been pulled up. Now, the first question was about, you know, that 10 years, the period that we have to wait and how unreasonable that is. But I would also like to understand, given, you know, the nature of the monopoly situation that I was talking about, is internally within the organisations, you know, particularly Wessex Water, you know, it must be clear to employees within that organisation of the, you know, essentially abusive practice that is going on. Is there no pressure internally from senior employees, you know, to take a responsible attitude in terms of the amount of profit that is taken out of their companies, or do people just sit quietly in these companies taking their salaries and not attempt to influence their management? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howes. But I very much doubt if our visitors can talk on behalf of their senior staff for the whole organisation. And we'd almost remember that Ofwat are responsible for the level of profitability that water companies can make. I don't know if there is anything you wish to come back on. That's probably Ian, maybe. Thank you.
Chair, I'm pretty sure I can't answer that question at all. Apologies.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Is there anything you wish to say, Ruth?
I guess just one point on the 10 years. So what probably I didn't describe that very clearly, but when we're designing our sewerage infrastructure, this is it's designed on a modelled spill frequency of 10 per year for a 10-year average, and using best available data and also climate change scenarios, rainfall data, things like that, and projected flows from existing developments and future development, which we're aware of over the 25-year design horizon, which we will get from local authority colleagues. So it's not that we're waiting 10 years to decide whether our infrastructure is adequate or not. It's been designed, it's been constructed based on models using data to suggest that spill frequency. And as we're now rolling out our event duration monitoring programme, which became a requirement in 2016, we're essentially validating those models based on that information. And where there are seen to be deteriorations or unsatisfactory performance, then we are investigating that and prioritising those overflows or that infrastructure for improvements.
Thank you very much. No, you can't. No, I'm sorry. No, you can't. Sorry. I'll move on to Councillor Miles, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair. Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I just picking up on Ian's point. They might say that Wessex Water are one of the best, but they're the best of a bad bunch, really, aren't they? So, yeah. Firstly, what we really want from everyone is honesty, and I haven't really heard an awful lot there today. I mean, there's lots of figures that are not included in their brief. I mean, most of the spills are contaminated are contaminated. They say they're not, but the majority of them are, especially the ones that go into the harbour. So spills in dumping in 2020 amounted to 390,000 cubic metres, and that's tonnes of sewage. And in 2021, it was 116,000 cubic metres tonnes. You know, this is an awful lot of solid waste. So and just want members to know this is colossal. This isn't a dog messing on the beach or a few seagulls, you know, pooping on the shoreline. This is colossal. This is going into the harbour at any one time. So we look at the oyster business here in the shellfish industry. The oyster farm here was closed for 5 months due to norovirus, and the only way norovirus can get into the sea and into the food chain is from human excrement. It can't get in any other way. And we've asked Wessex Water, do they know what the norovirus counts are? And they say they don't, and that's because they don't test for it. So they leave that to the industry to test to see how much norovirus is getting into the sea. So already this year, the oyster farm has been closed for 2 months. So in a spill in 2020, the E. coli reading, this is back in the summer now, this is when everyone's here, so when everyone's swimming, this is when everyone's here, the E. coli level, the reading was 92,000. 92,000. Now get this right, the level for Class B is is a maximum of 4,600. So you can really see this is a colossal problem. So this nearly led to the permanent downgrading of the shellfish beds in Poole, and that would have been half the harbour would have been shut. So we're not talking little bits here, guys. We're talking an awful lot, and it's happening all the time. And Councillor Stribley was saying that she was saying that, you know, it's only allowed 10 times, but I can assure you it happens most times. I think as it is now, it doesn't take an awful lot of rain for them to start dumping. This is the problem. They must be operating on almost full basis all the time. So it's not just 10 times a year. It could be many times a year, and it doesn't take an awful lot for the contamination to happen. And it only has to happen. One contamination could last months. So, you know, whether you're allowed to do 10 or 3 or 4, one could be enough to upset the whole thing. So I just want members to know that this is a really huge problem and it's ongoing and it's getting worse. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miles. Yeah, and this is the sort of thing that we've been reading in the press, of course, and that's one of the things that's generated, you know, this day to day. So I think it's probably worth asking Ruth if you've got any comments on what Councillor Miles has just said. Thank you.
So yes, just a couple of things. This isn't solid waste, which is discharging into the harbour. It's essentially rainwater. Yes, it does include foul sewage, and again, you know, whatever contaminants are picked up from hard surfaces as well. So, you know, driveways and things like that, which will include particulates and assorted things. So in terms of the norovirus, no, we don't analyse for norovirus. That's not part of the Shellfish Water Directive and not part of our requirements. We have been working with CFAS to develop a method to be able to analyse for norovirus in stormwater and in sewage effluent. That method is very new. The method there has been a method for shellfish flesh. It's a lot easier to analyse for norovirus in shellfish flesh. So we've been doing quite a bit of research with CFAS to enable us to now be able to do that, and that is something which we are undertaking. We're monitoring 5 storm overflows in Poole Harbour. We're taking samples of those as they're operating and analysing that for norovirus, as well as the E. coli and intestinal enterococci, which are the requirements of our permits and of the Shellfish Water Directive. So this is where I think one of your colleagues did say that our current legislative system is imperfect. That is a very, very good example of that. And obviously we are working with the public health teams within BCP to understand when there are higher incidents of norovirus, which may then mean that there is a greater risk from the shell fisheries of them being exposed to norovirus should our overflows operate. It's fair to say that also we do have a Coast Watch system at the moment, which does notify interested parties, including BCP and also surfers and the shell fisheries industry, of when those overflows are operating. But clearly the bacterial can get into the harbour from not just from storm overflows, from other sources as well. So, and I think also, I mean, the terminology is very emotive. Dumping implies that it's an active operation. This is a passive operation through overflows. So it's through a gravity system which is becoming overloaded and or overloaded in terms of the hydraulics, and then is wearing over into the through the outfalls and into the harbour as well. And obviously it's being overloaded through the rainwater, which is getting into the combined system as well. So I think, I mean, those are the only things which I'd like to say about that.
Thank you. We've got one more speaker, but before we get to that, I'd just like to make a couple of points that our guests here today are not here to be scrutinised. We're not asking to scrutinise Wessex water or environment. We're here gathering information on what's happening locally, and that's the aim of today. And if there's anything that we need to take away and consider, that's the whole objective of this session today. We're not holding anybody to account here, and especially our visitors. It's unreasonable to ask them to speak on behalf of their organisations. So, with that in mind, Councillor Hadley, would you like to come in? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got three very quick points I'd like to ask really. One is the reference to the water catchment, because clearly the rivers feeding Poole Harbour is most of Dorset, and the rest of Dorset and West Hampshire and South Wiltshire feed in through the Avon into Christchurch Harbour. So we get a lot of downstream effects. So is anyone looking at the cumulative impact of the many, because obviously you're reporting on one by one sewer outfalls, and we get everyone else, although the urban population is mostly in BCP's areas. The second one was around the old housing stock. So I think, Ruth, you said that half of the stock is 1960s and combined sewers. And obviously that was created in the pre-privatisation era, and particularly in areas of Poole and Christchurch that are low-lying. You can't do a soakaway. Certainly in my garden, I dig down, I hit harbour clay, and I've tried to do soakaways, and they're not going anywhere. So there's a question about whose responsibility, or who should be leading on trying to get, particularly for the old housing stock, get the water, surface water and rainwater away from the hard sewers. And the third one was around the evidence. And again, Ruth, I think you made reference to the lack of evidence. I talked to people at Bournemouth University, and they are doing a study in Poole Harbour, a European-wide study, which suggests a much higher mortality of oysters in Poole Harbour than in some of their partner sites in France, and something like 50% against 10%. So there's something about that, and what research is happening to actually get to the bottom of the impacts on wildlife, on fisheries, and on humans. Thank you.
Is that one for Ruth, please?
Yeah, certainly. I'm happy to take bits of that. So in terms of the upstream catchment, obviously, yes, we are working in hydrological catchments, which don't operate necessarily within political boundaries. So you're absolutely right to recognise that there are locations and conurbations from other council areas which will feed into both the Stour and the Froome, and may well impact water quality within your area. We do have, in both of those catchments, we do have some very intensive investigations which are looking at the entire length of the catchment to understand what are the contributions from all of our assets, both so the waste assets but also the abstractions as well. So if we're abstracting water, that can then impact flow, which means there's perhaps less dilution as well. So we're understanding the wider complexity of our operation on water quality at that catchment scale. And again, that will inform future investment requirements. Obviously, that information is shared with the Environment Agency and Natural England, and a lot of it is available on our website once it's been signed off by our regulators. And I'm very happy to provide you with some of that information as well. In terms of the old housing stock, yes, I mean, therein lies the challenge. The majority of the housing stock is pre the separation requirements, and as you say, not all locations lend themselves to soakaways. So there is the opportunity for a customer to opt out of the kind of the surface water charge, which I think is £23 a year, and provide your own alternative. But clearly, that's not very much of an incentive to do so. This is where I think water companies and our regulators need to work very closely with local authorities to understand what is the best solution in that location. And it may well be that at a kind of a street level, we need to separate out the rainwater from the foul in that location, and either find a location where we can discharge that to a nearby course, or to have some alternatives, such as, if you have got a lot of clay there, is there the opportunity to have some amenity features, some ponds and things like that? Again, it depends very much on the local situation, really, as to what's appropriate, but that can only be tackled, I think, in partnership and at a very local level. In terms of the lack of evidence, we are working with a little bit with Bournemouth University and also with BCP in terms of some of that European research funding, I think, which is looking at some AI monitoring and sensors within the harbour as well. We have approached Bournemouth University to be able to ask whether they can share some of that data with us, because ultimately what we want to do is understand what is happening within Poole Harbour, what's contributing towards either the decline in the shell fisheries or the water quality, and therefore what is the best solution to address this issue. So we're very much sort of working with our partner organisations to sort of have that call for evidence to inform our decision making, both our decision making, but also BCP, Environment Agency, everyone's, to ensure that we have the right solutions.
And Chair, if I may just add, absolutely back up what Ruth's saying. The difficulty that Councillor Hadley refers to around, for example, making comparisons between what's happening off the coast of Dorset and the rest, elsewhere. You're absolutely right to remark on it. It relies on modelling, really, on good data, but often on it's quite sophisticated modelling, and it is notoriously difficult, I'm afraid, to model what happens in a tidal marine environment with any sort of certainty, and that's probably the biggest challenge around this. But I just wanted to reassure you that we Wessex Water, CFAS, Natural England and others, including BCP, are working pretty hard on responding to the threat to the shell fishery. It's absolutely taken seriously. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, members, I'm going to stop the questioning there, but I will bring in Councillor Mark Anderson, who's been waiting. Before you come in, Mark, I'd just like to just ask you a question that you might be able to answer, and if not, maybe Peter Hay can answer it. But we've talked a lot about the outflows into the sea occasionally, and I just wonder what role the council had in informing visitors or people that are swimming, that a discharge has occurred, and whether there is actually any legal responsibility on the council to make sure that people are aware of these events. I know we heard that the outflows are reported routinely by I think online weekly, but I'm just wondering what the council's role, if any, in this area. Are you able to tell us that, or if not?
Steve, I can certainly say a little bit about Boscombe, because I know what happens at Boscombe Beach, because I know we measure the water quality there. What happens is when Wessex do a discharge, particularly from the surface water, there are potential, the data is assessed, and whether it's considered to be of a negative effect on swimmers, then red flag is raised, and then a notice is put up by Boscombe Pier to say that there are issues with water quality there and why. I don't know if Peter wants to come in and explain about more general on that.
If Peter's online, it might be handy if you could. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There are responsibilities. I think it's Destination and Culture that actually manage the beaches and do the signage there. So if anyone's from Destination and Culture, maybe they could clarify that. But there are responsibilities to put signage up when we're made aware through data from the Environment Agency of particularly high levels of any kind of danger affecting the bathing water. So it's not just in relation to microbiological data, but anything. So as you just said, Councillor Anderson, signage does go up.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask if Chris Saunders is online. He's from Destination Culture. So,
yeah, Chair.
Hello, Chris. Are you able to make a comment on what the council's responsibility would be?
Well, in terms of our legal responsibility, I have to say I'm not 100% sure to be able to give you an exact here and now. From our sort of moral obligation, we get updates from the Environment Agency through the predictive sort of alarms that they send out. So this is sort of modelling that they do regarding what we might get from rainwater falls and things like that, and we will action them as they come through. There were some issues last summer about them not being stood down actually, and hence red flags went on for slightly longer than perhaps they should do. But that was dealt with. Of course, testing only tells you what happened in the past. It doesn't tell you kind of what that might be 2 or 3 days out of date. So if we know there are particular incidents of outflows coming out, we will shut particular areas of the beach. I have to say it's relatively few and far between, thankfully, in the main bathing areas.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Okay, yes, please go on, Mark. Thank you.
I was just going to say I have, as you're aware, listened to the debate with interest. I would point out, or let you know rather, that I am trying to arrange a meeting with all the MPs anyway to lobby them. We're trying to set up a meeting, and we're involving Wessex and the Environment Agency in this, so we can lobby them on quite a lot of the issues that have been raised in the meeting anyway. And I will be happy to come back and let the committee know and the rest of the council know how we get on once we've had the meeting. I don't have a date yet. We're asking the MPs for some dates so we can get as many of them together as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Anderson. Okay, members, that's the end of the debate. Now, what I want to ask, if there is any recommendations we would like to put together. Now, bear in mind that we've really gone well over time on this. So, if there is a burning one that you'd like to table, or somebody would like to, and I can see 2 hands going up. So, if we can put this together very, very quickly, who wants to go first? Okay.
I think it's difficult for us to know what to say unless we know what it is that Councillor Anderson is planning on lobbying the MPs on. Because it's one thing to have a meeting, you need to know what it is you're asking for. And that's why I asked our guests what we should be asking for. So perhaps Councillor Anderson would be able to tell us what he's planning on lobbying about.
Okay, Councillor Rigby, what did you want? Thank you.
Yeah, I have got a recommendation actually that I want to put forward, and it might be worth Councillor Anderson actually answering that first, because it may be that the recommendation just ties into what his response is going to be. Okay,
Councillor Anderson, thank you.
Chairman, there are a whole raft of items that I am looking at, most of which you've raised in your meeting. I could spend 5-10 minutes at least talking about what you've said, because most of the items I've made a note of and most of the items are on my list to be discussed with the MPs. I haven't drawn up an agenda yet. I will be talking to Ruth and I'll be talking to Ian when we get some dates to come up with a definitive set of questions and discussion that we want to have with them. So at this point in time, no, I don't have an agenda as such, but I am working on it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I have a suggestion of my own here. When it comes to the Cabinet meeting, of course, I can put down a recommendation to Cabinet out with the stated agenda, and I believe that's probably appropriate. And I think in order to make a recommendation, what we can do is ask those that want to put a recommendation together to do that. I will circulate it to all the members and to get your agreement for that, something that I will present as a separate recommendation at Cabinet, because it is a complex issue. So if you're agreeable to that, I think that's the way forward. Well, I haven't got time to look at it now, so okay. I think we can still do that in slower time. We have plenty of time. But being very mindful of the time, and we've got another 2 agenda items to come, I think, yes.
My
Slade.
understanding is that if we're going to put a recommendation forward, we need to do it while the committee is here. Otherwise, it won't count as a recommendation. And we've got a recommendation in the chat, which Councillor Rigby was going to say, but gave the portfolio holder the chance. He didn't answer the question. And there is the recommendation, which has been duly seconded. So I would like to propose that we accept Councillor Rigby's recommendation.
Just on the Councillor, I haven't had a chance to see it yet. So can everybody else see that recommendation? No. Okay, please read it.
Yeah, so this hopefully this is worded right. So I think nothing kind of unites everyone in this room and all our residents. It kept trying to do the best thing for our, beaches, bathing water, seas, watercourses, everything like that. We live in BCP because this is something that we all care passionately about. So the recommendation is simply to recommend that the relevant portfolio holder write to all BCP MPs and Ofwat expressing BCP Council's concerns on the level of use of combined sewage overflows and the effect on this on both bathing water quality and the shellfishing industries, requesting that they lobby government for the legislation to be improved and action taken to address what are currently acceptable water quality levels.
Okay, this proposed. Is there any debate on that recommendation? Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. If I could just ask Chris, should that not be current unacceptable water quality levels? Not acceptable.
I'm happy to have it as unacceptable. It makes a bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy to support that.
Thank you. And any other discussion on that? Okay. And who's going to second that? Councillor Slade. Okay. Let's go to the vote on that then, shall we? All those in favour of that recommendation?
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Yes, 13. So clearly, and who's against? 1. Okay, so that motion is carried. Thank you. So we have a recommendation. There's been quite a long, very useful debate, very informative. And, when I quickly look at some of the issues on here, profits, the Ofwat involvement in that, the yearly monitoring all year versus just the swimming season, proactivity with planning applications, lobbying of MPs with facades, ongoing maintenance for on-site sewage instalments, MPs split. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and should we be asking the MPs to support a move to split surface water and foul sewage, complex societal issues along with all of this. The issue of upstream, downstream, which Councillor Slade made. So there's been a lot of really meaty issues raised here. And I would like to thank our guests most sincerely for a very informative presentation. And as you can tell, it's excited a few of us. But we really do appreciate you spending the time to give us a presentation and attend this afternoon, which is truly valued. So thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so members, we'll move on to the next agenda item. And looking at the time, I'm actually going to suggest that we bring in agenda item 8 before we do agenda item 7. So are you happy for me to do that? And I think we'll have a very, very quick comfort break of 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, members. As I said before we broke, I think it's probably pertinent that we bring in agenda item 8 and discuss that now before we do the agenda item 7. And agenda item 8 is scrutiny of transport-related cabinet report, bus operator enhanced partnership plan. And I think not that long ago we were talking about the strategy, and we were then looking forward to the plan that was coming out, and it's now been published. And to introduce the report to us, we have portfolio holder, Councillor Mike Green, portfolio holder for sustainability and transport, to introduce the plan that we've all been waiting for to us. So good afternoon, Councillor Green. Can I invite you to present the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully we can do this a little bit quicker than the last item. I mean, you recall that last year we approved the establishment of the enhanced partnership between ourselves and the bus operators in BCP, and that was basically a scaling up of the existing quality bus partnership that's lasted for a long time and putting it onto a legal footing. And what that allowed us to do was to put forward a bus service improvement plan and submit it to the Department for Transport, along with a bid for funding, which would allow us, we believe, to achieve the targets that have been set out within the BCP, the Bus Service Improvement Plan. The date which we would have the results of that bid has been put back a few times, and the latest suggestion is that we should get at least a decent indication by the end of February. And that will, of course, determine whether we need to revise the BCP or whether it stays as it is. Because that's something that gets agreed between us and the bus operators and is dependent on what money is there. So it may be okay to keep as it is. It may need to be scaled back. It may be needs to be altered in other ways, depending on the feedback and particularly the funding we get. But it's a little bit of a circular situation, because we know already, they've made it very public, that the pot into which all the local transport authorities are bidding has been massively oversubscribed. So we know that there's going to be a very significant amount of scaling back across the country. And we've heard informally that what the DfT are looking for is which of the local authorities that are bidding in they think have got realistic BCPs, and that they're likely to be able to deliver on that. And that particularly at the moment includes a demonstration that we're on top of the democratic process, and that if they say that the money is going to be there, then it will be used, and it will be used in the right way. And that's why at the moment what I'm going to be doing is asking Cabinet for the delegated responsibility to be able to finalise the enhanced plan, the partnership plan and the partnership scheme in reaction to that that statement that comes from DfT and the announcement of what we've been given, in order hopefully to beat we'll have to beat the April deadline that's got to be there to be able to establish and to publish the final plan and the final scheme. So that's what this is all about. And please, given the timings, I'll just leave it there for the moment, if that's right, Chairman, and take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Councillor Green. So, members, we'll open up for debate. Councillor Allison, thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to start by saying I think it's really good that we've got this paper quite early. I know the Bus Back Better strategy didn't require us to have any of these enhanced partnerships in place until July of this year, I think. So you require it ahead. Is that all right? Ahead of the curve on this.
Sorry if I may, Chairman. No, we at the moment the date is the 1st of April in which we have to have it. But okay. there is some talk about it being pushed back towards the end of the month. But at the moment, 1st of April is where we are.
Okay, but I think we're in good stead. What I wanted to ask is the document obviously has potential for us moving forwards into franchising, and I know that comes with some risks. So I just wanted to ask whether or not there's been any conversations, or whether you or anyone in administration would be interested in looking deeper into whether or not a franchisee agreement would work for us in BCP.
Councillor Green?
Yeah, thank you. That was discussed when we agreed to go the enhanced partnership route, because franchising was the alternative to it. But when we looked at the amounts that were involved, I think Greater Manchester is looking at the potential for franchising. And forgive me because I haven't got the figures to hand at the moment, but I think, and again, it'll be on the record for what we discussed 6 months ago, whenever it was, at this Overview and Scrutiny Board. But I think it was something like 1,500 people were already working on it, and that was just to get the franchise ready. And having looked at it, like basically every other local authority in the country, with the exception of that one, we've all decided that franchising would not be the way that we would go. It is a huge commitment, and not one that would actually swallow up pretty much every funding source that we've got, and not just for transport.
Thank you. Any other members? Yeah, Councillor Slade. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thanks very much. This paper is a good start, but there's a few things about it that I'm really disappointed with, actually. The first thing I just wanted to question about the meeting arrangements. There's quite a lot there about the governance, which is great to see all the governance put out there, sort of, very clearly. It states there that observers, town and parish council and BCP council observers can attend the meetings. It doesn't give us any information about how those meetings are going to be publicised. And also it talks about the minutes of the meeting. Can you confirm whether those minutes will be available on the BCP Council website for the public to see? And then specifically relating to the plan itself, I hate to be negative, but I worry that if you're expecting to have a transformational impact by looking at a target, so the 2019-20 average speeds for the buses at the moment is 12 miles an hour. The target is 13.2 miles an hour. The main reason that people don't use the buses is because they take too long. That is not going to make someone who doesn't already use the bus suddenly use the bus. And whilst I understand that if you go to the survey, which was mainly with bus users, the bus users' priority is to increase the speed. There's a higher percentage of people want to have better speeds than lower prices. The transformational approach is to get people who don't use the bus to use the bus, because everyone that uses the bus that doesn't now is going to take a car off the road, which will then have the impact of properly speeding up. And I really worry that this feels like tinkering around the edges, that you might consider some arrangements and special deals on pricing. But while the pricing is not competitive with driving a car, and I hear all the arguments, and I've listened to it over and over again of, well, we don't really factor in the true costs of taking a journey by car, by journey, one journey at a time. I hear all that. We all hear all that. But it's not making me, or most people I know, decide to not get the car out and get the bus instead. So what makes you think that this is it will hit its targets, I'm sure, because you're only expecting 13.2 miles an hour, but it isn't transformational. I'm disappointed that there isn't anything more about dealing with the biggest issue of bus patronage, which is, if we actually deal with the school run, we will transform journey times at the most polluting times of the day. And by getting young people on buses across all of the neighbourhoods, we will set in train a complete change for a whole generation, whereby they go by bus and not by car. And that feels like a really missed opportunity in this. I recognise it will require investment, but there's not even an aspiration in there to do it subject to funding. And the last bit, I'm disappointed with Annex A. It talks about the list of all of the new bus lanes and bus priority things. And when you actually go to page 54 and you look at the proposed schemes requiring funding, there's hardly anything there. And a lot of it is review on street parking, review direction of bus movements. They're not significant. There's no, apart from Ringwood Road, there's no real new bus lanes or major infrastructure for buses, and that feels a little bit underwhelming. I'm trying to use really gentle language. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as far as the meeting's concerned, I can't tell you about what's going to be published online and what's not. And this is obviously very much draft, something that's going to be discussed with the bus companies. But it did need to have a section on governance within the paper, which we've made sure that we have done. It was, but actually, I've had a note to say that potentially they will, because of the commercial situation on the fundings, etc., that if they are published, they may have to be fairly heavily redacted. But I think that's sort of secondary to it. I have to say I'm disappointed that you're disappointed with that, Councillor Slade. And it may be that it could be worth digging a little bit closer into what was said by the respondents to the various surveys. And also, remember, these have been done with the experience of what's being done elsewhere and the guidance from the Department for Transport. The reason for going from 12 mile per hour to the target to 13.2 mile per hour, which is a very significant difference. That's a 10% improvement in times. And what we've seen up and down the country, the rule of thumb is that for every 1% improvement in the times taken, we get a 1% improvement in the bus patronage. When we see that there was a substantial increase between about 2004 2005 when we entered the Quality Bus Partnership, going through to it reached a peak about 10 years later, and it's just declined a little bit since then. We are already responding considerably better, if you like, than most of the rest of the country since those dates. And indeed, the decline that we've had since the peak has been less than the decline elsewhere. But to be able to put in to get that extra 10% of bus speed, which therefore means 10% we believe on bus patronage, in a situation where congestion is getting worse and worse and worse, in any case, is a substantial improvement. And that's where we and our guidance we received for the DFT is the sort of area that we should be looking for. I think it's absolutely right to say that the majority of this is based at looking at those who already sometimes take a bus. And that is approximately 60% of the population. And everything that we've seen, again, this comes from national studies as well, do suggest that there is considerably greater chance of take-up from those that already take a bus than do not. Nevertheless, there are elements in the BCP, if we get the funding for it, which will very much attack both of those potential markets. And as we see an increase in bus reliability, because that's the other one that we didn't mention, it's how reliable the bus times are, as well as how fast the buses are, which is what tends to bring people in. We would expect both of those to benefit, because it will be happening at the same time as we expect congestion levels to mean that car journeys are getting slower and slower. And that brings me particularly to the point about the on-street parking. The reason that we're looking at this is that the bus companies, particularly bus operators, and again, it's true around the country, but particularly here, have identified that as the biggest barrier that they have to being able to increase the bus reliability and the bus speeds, which is exactly what we're after. Mention also about the pricing, and again, if you dig deeper into that, I think you will see that that's one of the strands that comes into it. And I in fact, even with a blurred background, I can either see or sense Councillor Slade shaking her head, but I'm sure it'll be one of those. There are elements in there, and there are particularly those looking at secondary school, and to some extent primary school people. You'll see in there that there is a a proposal to look at it for how we not only simplify and reduce the prices, but particularly do so for young people. And I think that is where we'll be able to attack the school run. I do agree with Councillor Slade that the school run coinciding when it does with peak traffic is one that we absolutely need to attack, and to be able to make it available for youngsters to be able to get to school rather than parents driving them there would certainly help. We have, I think, again, it's in the report, but I think it's 24% of those current secondary school pupils currently get the bus there, and that is something that we would want to improve, along with cycling and walking, which take up another significant chunk as well. So yes, there are elements in there which attack each of those key barriers to bus routes, to bus use, those being the reliability, the frequency, the information on it, and the fares themselves. And all of these are possible. This will be a plan and a scheme that will be revised as it goes through, but this is where we believe is realistic. And if we go to government with something which is not realistic and is not fully funded, etc., then it is unlikely that we will be getting the bid outcome that we need to be able to push forward with this. Shall I leave it there, Chairman?
Thank you. Councillor Slade.
Yeah, just to say that the proposal talk about standardising young people's fares. It doesn't talk about actually cutting them. And the suggestion, this 15-minute journey is only £2. You actually look at going from place to place, not the length of a journey. Because if it's 12 miles an hour, 15 minutes doesn't get you very far. You know, there's no way you can get to from where I live in 15 minutes, and it certainly isn't £2. So, you know, I think that it's very easy, isn't it, to make it sound good, but the user experience is not good. And of course, a 10% increase sounds great, doesn't it? But from 12 miles an hour to 13.2 miles an hour, I think we need to remind 13.2 miles an hour. That's not really a journey time, and we should all be getting on our bikes. So I'd say perhaps we should have some more cycle lanes, because most of us could cycle faster than 13.2 miles an hour.
Except me, Councillor Green. Before I bring in Councillor Howell, I've got a question for you, Councillor Green, and it really relates to the pricing. I mean, the feedback that I get from people using the buses, they're too expensive. You know, ordinary families, you know, with children, they go on a bus trip around the town. It costs them a lot of money, it really does. But relating to that, I'm not asking you what you can do about it now, but relating to that is the relationship of the competing bus companies, and how this plan helps you or us as an authority, if you like, to review pricing mechanisms and impact those charges, if you can, through this partnership agreement. And I don't know if does this plan allow you to do that, and what obligations are there for those companies to take heed of the suggestions that are made?
Thank you, Chairman. Difficult is the answer to that one, because there is the element that the commercial confidentiality means that there are only certain things that we're allowed to discuss with both the bus operators simultaneously. Within that simplification that we were talking about earlier, we would expect, and in fact it is specified, that there needs to be considerably greater cooperation between those two bus companies. Remember, it's not just us that's signing up to it. It is the two bus operators that are signing, well, in fact, and the tiny ones as well, who are signing up for this as well. So there needs to be proper cross-ticketing. It needs to be done on a smart basis. It needs a simplification so people can see that they're not going to have to change route, or where they do, that there is an easy crossover between them. There will need to be price capping, as far as possibly on daily caps or weekly caps or whatever, in a sort of oyster type way. But the other thing that it will give the opportunity to do is to look primarily at the routes where there is crossover between the two competing partners, because it cannot have escaped anyone's notice that on those very high frequency routes, There are a lot of times where the buses are sometimes only a few seconds apart, and are even pre-pandemic mostly empty, because there has been competition between the two bus companies for those flagship routes. When it is working together as a partnership, there is the opportunity to be able to come out with something that makes more sense as far as frequency on those routes are concerned. And what that should then do is to free up the drivers and free up the vehicles as well, to be able to expand to the less frequent routes. And you'll see on there that there is an ambition. It's not something that we know will happen. It certainly won't happen on all of the routes, but to try to increase the frequency on many of the hourly routes to half hourly, just to get people to be ready to get on a bus when at the moment they're not, because it's not going in the same way. And the difference between this and the Quality Bus Partnership that's been operating to date is that this is a legally binding arrangement instead of a voluntary arrangement. And we're saying to the government, give us this funding because we are working as one. You provide us the infrastructure, you provide us some revenue funding as well for the next 2 to 3 years, and we will be able to put it all together and make it into a plan that improves year on year.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got Councillor Howell now, and no one else has indicated, so following him in, I'm going to bring in Councillor Andy Hadley that wants to comment, and then I think we're going to have to bring this session to a close unless there's anybody else now. Okay, so Councillor Howell, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask a specific question about pool regeneration. In the BCP Travel Survey 2019, the #1 key barrier to bus travel was no direct route, too many changes. You know, one of the main issues with trying to revitalise the quay, and that we will face in terms of trying to persuade people to live on the regeneration sites, including the one that the council has approved at Carter's Quay and it is needing to build, it is to provide adequate bus services. And as at the moment, there aren't direct routes from, for example, and particularly the main route from Ashley Cross from Bournemouth down towards Poole Quay and the Regen area, because we have a terminus bus station in the way. You know, clearly it's an ambition, still hopefully an ambition of the council to relocate the bus station or reconfigure it in a more modern way. And I'd like to understand where the portfolio holder is in terms of delivering those kind of free routes that can really persuade people to jump on the bus and come down to the tourist sites in the town, but also to live in the town centre and get other places where they work and socialise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. How do you reach the parts that other parts can't reach? Have you got an answer for that?
Well, it rather sticks having to say it, but I've got to entirely agree with Councillor Howell. There are a number of routes, and I think you particularly identify the regen sites and Poole Quay, which are not well enough served by the current bus routes, and particularly given our ambitions for that area, this will need to be addressed. I do believe the enhanced partnership will give us the opportunity to have those discussions and indeed to influence them. But Carter's Quay, you're absolutely right. There are the people going to Poole Quay at the moment, particularly, it is almost too difficult to get there if they're coming by bus, because they know that they will have to do the last 10-12 minutes by foot, coming from Poole bus station, or wait a long time for a change. That doesn't make sense as far as I'm concerned when we're looking at the regeneration and also the tourism possibilities for the area. So I would see this as an opportunity to get involved in those discussions, to try to find a way that we're not having a complete hub and spoke arrangement with the bus station, and to see some of those routes moving through to the quay and then on to Hamworthy, even potentially to have a little loop round where some of them, instead of stopping at the bus station and then turning back round again, are coming down, going over one bridge and coming back the other bridge, to be able to get more access to that part of Hamworthy and also to Poole Quay. So I think there is real opportunity in this to do exactly what Councillor Howell's talking about, and I think it will be worthwhile doing so.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hadley, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things for me. I guess I have to relay, and I'm sure he'll be disappointed, but I'm disappointed at the ambition in this document, and I said so at the earlier stage to this. Part of that is about some of the objectives are quite woolly. They don't really have timed objectives. So there's the bit about how we can hold the bus companies to account for their part. Annex C does talk about a few of them, and Councillor Slade has already referred to those. So there's something about objectives that we can hold them to. Something about geography. So obviously we worked with Dorset Council on transforming travel, and part of that is recognising the cross-border a need to work cross-border, that people live and work in different places, and particularly things like Ferndown Industrial Estate and other places that people need to get to that are outside our own catchment. So the map is drawn for BCP, and certainly that comes into the integrated ticketing and the other bits about how much more expensive it is to go beyond the pale, as it were. That brings me on to the Getting About ticket, which is still in there at a 20% premium rate, which is why it's never been used. It's badly advertised and at a premium, so people think, well, why should I use it, until they see the wrong colour bus sailing past and go, I should be able to get on that bus. So I don't believe there should be a premium. It's not. And it does come back to, unfortunately, the choice of doing enhanced partnership rather than moving to the franchising model, where we would have an awful lot more control. And I appreciate there are responsibilities and complexities with doing that, but it is the choice that's been made does restrict our capacity to actually push for things that would serve the customer rather than the bus companies. And then on integration, and again, there's a little bit of positive movement on integration. I've only been asking for 25 years probably on that, but particularly paragraph 512 pushes out rapid transit. Well, it's not in the bus company's interest to push forward rapid transit, so I'm not surprised, but it's disappointing, and it does come back to the sorry, it is in there. Please don't shake your head. It does come back to the ambition of us as BCP, a city region, the big plan, all those sorts of things, public transport, and getting people who have no inclination to get onto a bus onto public transport. And in places like in Croydon and Sheffield, in places where they did move to having something else in the mix, it really did make that significant change. So I think that's a real worry. And I suppose the other one is a comment that was made in response to a previous one around it being a legally binding agreement. Of course, that cuts both ways. So if it's not in the legally binding agreement, it's rather less easy for us to get something in down the line when we decide we've got a new good idea, such as the one that you've just talked about with Councillor Howe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Green, if you want to come back, but if you can make it as brief as possible, please, because we're sort of running out of time here. Thank you.
I absolutely will do, and I'll take each of those points if I could. We've already discussed about the ambition, and this has to be realistic. We are going to the government with cap in hand, looking for funds, and that's why this is partnership and it's been developed together. You suggest the objectives are woolly, and to some extent, I think I agree with Councillor Hadley on that one, because. And that is something that will be refined as we get the settlement, and I believe it will be refined year on year as well as we go forward with this one, and we'll be able to narrow it down. We are already working cross-border with Dorset, but also with Hampshire and with Wiltshire to be able to put this together. However, unless we put a suitable boundary around it, we're going to go on forever discussing it and discussing integration rather than actually getting in as we've been required by DfT and putting a bid forward. But there is a commitment to do so. The Getting About ticket, I absolutely agree. At a 20% premium, people aren't doing it. And actually, if you dig closer into that, you'll see that I think it's 0.05% of journeys are taken on that Going About ticket, which shows that it has totally failed in the way that it's been put together, and that is something that, as part of the enhanced partnership, we'll be able to get together. And the reason I was shaking my head about paragraph 512 and the rapid transit study that was done is the bus operators were not involved in that. This is the result of a pretty in-depth challenge that was put forward by our officers and taken forward by consultants without involving the bus operators. Where we will have opportunity for integration, I think, is to look at the rail service, which I think Councillor Hadley and I both have hopes are going to end up as a metro type service, going through at a much more frequent across the conurbation, and to combine that with an emphasis on north-south and orbital bus routes to make sure that we have a great deal more integration, which would also, to my mind, and it's in the report, be integrated with the cycle and scooter share. That I think that it's going to be able to put everything together into a sustainable transport integrated model, which I think we all would like to see going forward. Can I leave it there then, Chairman?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Green. I have to thank Councillor Hadley for raising the issue about the 20% premium on the Getting About ticket, because it's something I did actually pick up myself reading the report, because one would imagine that you would normally offer a 20% discount on a ticket like that, not a 20% premium. And it's hardly surprising nobody wants to use it, is it? So anyway, Councillor Farr, you want to come in?
Yeah, if I may, yeah, just come to mind about we have the existing Transforming Cities infrastructure in what's currently in the process of being done. I'm just wondering how that might sort of join up with the bus operation enhanced partnership. Obviously, with the Transforming Cities Fund, the aims are, from my understanding, is primarily to encourage cycling, whereas this new funding is to encourage people to get on the bus. But it's still the same aims of reducing the impact on the environment, travel time, etc. So I'm just interested how is there sort of a joined up thinking with both, and obviously there's some overlapping in the aims, which is a positive thing.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. I do seem to recall the report does talk about how it integrates and by provision of e-scooters and bicycles next to the bus stop locations. But did you want to say anything further on that? No.
Just to say that it has been assumed that in putting the bid together, it's assuming that the Transforming Cities Fund corridors will be delivered, and that includes 2 which are bus emphasised as well. So it's building on those and absolutely integrating.
Thank you. So, members, I think I'd like to bring this discussion to a close now. If there's nobody else, which would be very handy, because we have got another session which could take a little bit of time. In that case, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Councillor Green, for that. So we'll go back to agenda item 7, Climate Change Inquiry Roundup. Okay, we ran out of time, didn't we? The climate inquiry and the review of the climate annual report. It was an extremely vigorous debate, and we covered a lot of ground, although some people didn't quite appreciate it. But nevertheless, I have, and you've all seen that in an aid to sort of get ourselves through this, I've come up with a suggested generic type of recommendation to be made to Cabinet, and I've circulated it. And it was amended just prior to this meeting, which I'd like us to consider. And I'm going to promote that or propose that recommendation. There are two other recommendations that are standalone to that, both having been made by Councillor O'Neill, which were again have been circulated. But before we get to that point, let me just open the debate and see if anybody else would like to. I mean, we did ask for your views since the last meeting to see if anyone else had any other recommendations. As I said, I have received some replies, but if anybody wishes to open up any of that just now. Yes, of course.
Thanks, Chair. While I wasn't at the full debate, and normally we have the thing where if you're not in attendance at the main debate, you don't get to vote on any recommendations or anything like that. Can you just clarify whether those who were not at the previous meeting will be allowed to get involved with this debate, please? Thank you.
I actually don't. I'm not sure that if you weren't actually at the meeting, it's very difficult to see how you can actually vote on the recommendations coming out of it. But let me just get clarification from monitoring officer on that.
I'm sorry, Chairman, I was detained in dealing with other urgent matters arising from this meeting. Normally speaking, in a planning committee, if you haven't been at the meeting for most of the debate, you can't vote on the matter at the end because you won't have heard all the arguments. That's not the case for general meetings, in that you can be absent for a part of a meeting. Say, for instance, you have to take an urgent call and come back later and still finish the debate and vote. So the particular circumstances you're asking about, Councillor Rigby, were you not there at all for any of the discussion?
I had to send my apologies because of COVID, but I did follow online. Well, so I wasn't physically here in the room, which I thought had previously been the rules on having any votes or anything like that while we had these hybrid meetings.
Yes, that's true, but then is the vote being taken today on a matter that was discussed at a previous meeting? Then I would suggest that you can't vote today, Councillor Rigby. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that, Councillor Rigby. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Yeah, that rule obviously will apply to anybody else that wasn't there on the day and is now here. Councillor Kelsey, do you wish to speak?
Please, Chairman, if I may. It's going to be a very strange one then, isn't it? Because I was watching on and off online, and by the end of the meeting, there were very few people left here. So that would probably leave you only about 3 or 4 people to actually vote on any of this. I think the monitoring officer may need to give dispensation to allow those that have read your comments and read the reports to be able to vote on this today. Otherwise, it's going to be an absolutely totally pointless exercising anyone taking part in that.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a statutory type issue. This was just an inquiry, wasn't it, that many people did participate online. Let me just ask the monitoring officer again if she has got a view on that. And absolutely right, part of the reason that we did come, we ran out of time, but 2, we were also running out of people. And that applied to the people that were advising us, actually, online. For example, we didn't even get to the regeneration issues because there were no officers or politicians here to answer the questions. So, just take your advice again. Is it possible to offer a dispensation on this precise?
So, Chairman, the legislation lays down very strict criteria for dispensations, and without some time to think about this issue, which I may take in the break, I don't feel that it meets any of the criteria, unfortunately, for a dispensation at this stage, because it was solely due to members choosing not to be physically in the room for a meeting. I think it would be dangerous for us to step away from that protocol, because we have imposed it in, for example, Standards Committee, where we had one meeting at which all the debate was taken, but members who were at a subsequent meeting could only the members who'd been at the previous meeting could vote on that one. And I think it's a principle we need to keep quite a strict control over. But I'm happy to have a look at it in the break, Chair.
Okay, I mean, can I just see how many people were actually left here? If we can do that. Yeah. So, what I'm trying to get at, would we have been core at that particular point with those remaining? There were 6 of us. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think we could proceed on this, but I am reluctant. Yes, please.
Time allowing, you may like to enter into a certain amount of debate today. It may not be the full and the entire debate, but since those members heard the presentations from officers and others on the day, you may exercise your discretion to hold debate today and then vote.
Thank you. Of course, you know, there is another option, and that would be for me to write to the various portfolio holders on what we believe as a committee was, you know, the general views expressed on the day, which is something I did consider, like a mini report on the climate change. Well, I haven't prepared that as a report at the moment, but essentially the recommendations come out of it do form the structure of the report. Yes, Councillor Slade.
There are 6 of us here who were present for the whole meeting and at the end of the meeting. That does make us quorate. It would be an idea we could say if there's anybody who was not one of that quoracy who wants to make comment on it, we could do that very briefly and still go to a vote in the time so that it was the official recommendation of the ONS board, because we took so much time on it. I would be really upset if all of that work went to waste and ended up with a letter rather than an official recommendation of the board. And if the members who had to leave or weren't able to be here are comfortable with that, then everyone should be happy. But I do know that Councillor O'Neill had his hand up with a query.
Could I just come in on that? I mean, what we can basically do is take the 3 recommendations that we've already had circulated, which everybody's considered, and then take that as a basis of discussion and see what the general consensus about that is, and take them one by one. And if we get to a position where the general consensus is that it's not something we can proceed with, then we won't be able to. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm sort of a bit flummoxed by the whole thing. The whole debate prior, whoever was here and whoever wasn't, was about the potential for recommendations to Cabinet on serious matters. However, the recommendations that have been published, to me, and I might be alone in this and I accept that, are quite clear as to their intent. Do we need to debate them, or do we just need to vote on them? Thank you.
Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair. I think the way that I would look at it is that these recommendations have come out since, or some of the ones we've discussed as a group have come out since that debate. They're almost like something they need to be taken in themselves, because they don't all relate back to exactly what was discussed in the climate emergency, in the climate inquiry that we did. I would take it as a separate debate. We want to debate those recommendations as a group. That fulfills the debate side of it, and then we can go ahead.
Okay, I wonder if we can do that in 10 minutes. Councillor Stribley.
Yeah, yes, Chairman, we had a 4-hour session on this. You circulated a draft recommendation to us all some time ago, I forget the exact date, but certainly had it for 10 days or more, and so will all other members. I responded with correcting a couple of typos and suggesting an odd word in. I'm basically content that it covers what we discussed at the meeting, as far as we did discuss things, because basically we were asking questions. All members of this committee have had 10 days or a fortnight to look at it and consider it, and I think if they haven't come back at this stage, it means they are accepting it. I would be quite happy to vote on it. I agree entirely with Councillor O'Neill on the subject.
Anybody else? Oh, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy with 1A to H. However, we didn't discuss, as far as I can remember, the local plan, and we certainly didn't discuss the parking supplementary planning document. So I don't think that we can vote on those.
Okay, the SPD, parking SPD was discussed. In fact, I recall it, Councillor O'Neill raising it at the time. And the other one on the local plan, I think that was also mentioned, because when I got the recommendation, I do recall that actually we, this is being already considered by the local plan, to be honest. But as a way forward, Councillor Slade.
Thank you. I tend to agree with Councillor Edwards. I do just want to clarify on item 1. We did have the words risk assessment that I'd sent to you that hasn't made its way through. But items 2 and particularly 3, I totally understand where they are coming from. But I do think that this is about the climate plan, and therefore it feels to me as though those 2 issues should be done separately, that if we wish to ask the portfolio holder to reconsider the SPD, that should be a separate scrutiny item, and the local plan is going through the local plan process, and we should be putting that forward when we come back to the local plan. So I'm very comfortable with number 1, but 2 and 3 I'd be a bit nervous about.
Okay, I mean, the reason they are split out in the way that they are is because those two recommendations are actually specific to the planning process and not the inquiry on necessarily on the climate change. There are also different portfolio holders specifically for those. But never, so, you know, although we've got 3 recommendations, we can take them all individually. And if we decide not to proceed with those recommendations, we don't have to. Sorry, I've got so many people with their hands up. Councillor Earl, you see, we've only got 6 minutes left. We're going to talk ourselves out of time again.
Thanks, Chair. I think for me, what's difficult is the difference between discussion and debate. So we can discuss things as a general sort of information gathering exercise and to share views, but we haven't debated these recommendations properly, and that's where I think there's a distinction. So if we spoke about them on email, but as far as I didn't see that as like opening a debate where we would be able to have that like proper formal discussion. So that's where I think there's a difference. So I would rather at least either take them separately or have a chance to discuss the latter 2. Thanks.
I agree that we should have the opportunity to debate each of the recommendations, and that was the intent, not to just present them as they vote on them. The idea was, and the idea of putting them out beforehand was to try to save a little bit of time so we were all armed and had considered them before we got here today. But you're absolutely right. I wouldn't dream that we should just vote on something that's been, so they do need to be debated. So way forward on this, I think that we could actually just discuss the recommendations then and discuss them on the merits and decide if we want to table them as a formal proposal, I guess, at this meeting. Is that an acceptable way forward? Yeah. Tony O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think we're right out of time for an in-depth and meaningful debate. Whether it's items 1, 2 or 3, I did raise and others raised the local plan and the other aspects. Having said that, they are entitled to a fuller debate. Therefore, I'd rather those be deferred to a future meeting.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. And I think, sorry. Councillor Green, I'm not sure that I want to bring you into this bit of the debate. This is for the board to decide what they want to do. But as you're I was hoping for the environment, I'd probably be a bit churlish if I didn't allow it. So go on.
But I'll be very big and hope that I can help. It's probably best to refer to what Councillor Slater said, and I sort of agree with her in 3/4 and disagree with the other one. I hope she won't feel upset about that. As far as recommendations 2 and 3 is concerned, I agree with Councillor Slade that these are ones that could be discussed, but this probably isn't the paper to discuss them on for the same reasons as Councillor Slade has brought forward. As far as item 1, your own recommendations, Chairman, these are something I can say, having read them through, that I would be very happy to accept. It's not necessarily something, if it gets done on a letter rather than a resolution, we can do that, but I certainly would be happy to support those. And the one last thing that I disagree with Councillor Slade on is she said it would be a pity that all the work that was done would go to waste. It will not go to waste. Whether there is a resolution or not, The debate has been taken on board. It has been listened to. I think it is filled with the recommendations that the Councillor Bartlett has put together. I think that does give a consensus, an idea of where we were going, and I can absolutely assure you that that work will not go to waste.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Okay, so the proposal then is that we defer the 2 recommendations, but we do have a debate on the first one and then decide if we want to take that forward as a recommendation. Are you content with that, Councillor Earl?
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to ask about my suggestion to include a climate risk assessment as well and make sure that that was included in E. Have you seen that?
Chair, I added the 2 words when I emailed you back and you said, good idea. And then when you sent the returned amendment, you'd forgotten to add the words. But that's okay. It was a long day. So it was on the item that says about recommending a climate strategy. It was and risk assessment. It was simply those adding of those words, and the rest of it was unchanged, and you seemed content.
Okay.
Having added everybody else little words here and there.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Yes, under E.
If I seem to, under which one?
E.
E. I thought I'd amended that today and recirculated it. I did.
Under item E, when you said, how's this? Expectation that a BCP climate emergency strategic policy and risk assessment will be developed, from which an implementation plan, So yeah.
Is it in there?
No, it's not.
Okay, so we're already into the debate on the first recommendation. The point is, are we happy to proceed with the debate on the first recommendation, members, and ignore or not ignore them, but bring the others back at another time, deferred? All right, we're content with that. Okay, so members, let's open the debate on it. Now, I'll start the debate because my overriding feeling about the climate discussion was that, yes, you know, a lot of work's been done, great, but an awful lot more needs to be done. But at this moment in time, you know, the team is still being built up. It's, you know, we just recently had a new head of climate recruited, and it seemed to me that we really need to give that new team a time to settle in and make some real progress. But at the same time, I felt it was necessary to maybe give them a bit of direction about to cover some of the issues that we felt were maybe not there or being considered currently in that recommendation. And so the aim is not be, you know, too critical in that recommendation. It's really to facilitate a bit of direction and also to set out our aims to bring it back to the committee at a future date to see what progress has been made by the new team effectively. You know, with a lot of additional resources have been put into the climate change, you know, and a huge amount of additional resource actually. And so it's clear that, you know, the council's really intent on challenging, you know, dealing with the climate change. I hope it seems to be. So that the recommendation is sort of is couched in very general terms to express, you know, what direction we would like some of these things to go in, and then to bring it back. So that's why it's couched in the way that it is. Kelsey.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I agree with everything you just said. Can I just ask, maybe we put time on that, a length of time that we want it to come back on? We don't want it dragging on forever and a day. So I think 6 months minimum.
It's in. I think I've actually included it in the recommendation. I think I've said September.
Yeah, and just to go back on the previous points on the risk register. Those that are not reading the chat bit here, that is actually already planned to go in. There is funding for a risk register to go into as part of this.
If it's not in there, oh, sorry, the risk assessment. Yeah, okay. If it's not in there, it needs to be added in there. I agree, and we will take an action to amend that and insert that at the appropriate place. Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Earl, did you want to come in?
It was only to include the climate risk assessment into E. That was purely all it was. I don't know whether that's something I can do verbally, or do you want me to send back?
No, we've already already
Lovely.
suggested that the draft recommendation you've all seen is amended to include that.
Lovely, that's fine.
Okay. Anything else, members? Okay, so I'm going to propose that recommendation as amended. Councillor O'Neill has just seconded it. All those in favour of that motion?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Thank you very much. So, how about that? Okay, I think we've dealt with that, and just wasting time. Let's have a look at anything else. I think that's it now on for this afternoon. So we've got a bit of a break now for this evening, and I'm sure you're all looking forward to this evening's session. I can't wait. So anyway, with that, we'll close the meeting now, and I'll see you at 6 o'clock. Thank you, members.